The CBC curriculum is actually a structure. At every point, there's a situation where a child is expected to be in school in what is going to be called pre-primary, primary, junior school, and senior school. You made it. Karibu tena to Elimu Cafe, and I'm your host, Teacher Leah, educator, and I'm here once again to take you through CBC, but now a bit more complicated, technical. But I hope you'll stay with me as we try and unravel this beautiful, beautiful, beautiful curriculum. It might have its problems. Yes, we all know about that, and we shall discuss that in another episode. But let's try and look at it from the angle at which it was supposed to be received. Think about it as though umepika chakula uko jikoni and you can feel, you can hear, you can smell it ukiwa uko nyumbani. You can smell, hata kama inaungua, you know how it's supposed to look. So when we talk about CBC, let's think about it in its glory, and then we shall address the issues that it comes with, the baggage. As all of us know, everything that is brought forth to us has to have its problems. But today, let's look at the structure. Let's look at the vision, and let's discuss that in detail and see how we can be able to better understand this curriculum for our children and for our learners. So the CBC curriculum is actually a structure. So the structure is the same thing you used to know about 844. You'll talk about 8 years in primary, 4 years in secondary, and 4 years in college. So the CBC structure is actually a 2, 6, 3, 3. That's the structure. What does structure mean? It means at every point, there's a situation where a child is expected to be in school in what is going to be called pre-primary, primary, junior school, and senior school. So let's start with junior school. Let's start with pre-primary because that's the lowest. Now, pre-primary is actually 2 years. Pre-primary. And at this level, the child is expected to be 4 to 5 years. I really want to emphasize this because in the past, children used to go to school when they were 3 years and sometimes even below. But in this new structure, the government policy dictates that the learner should have turned 4 by January 31st of the year they are joining pre-primary, which is now the 2 years in the CBC system. A lot of parents have been asking, oh, my child is not yet 4, they're turning 4 in October. I want to caution you against not following this particular policy, and we shall talk about that more in detail in another episode when we try and discuss child development theories. But for now, what you need to know is that the child should have turned 4 years by January 31st of the year in which they're joining pre-primary. And this pre-primary has pre-primary 1, which is the 4 to 5 years. And then it has pre-primary 2, which is the 5 to 6 years. And at this point is where you see schools will have a small graduation with children in their tiny graduation gowns, and they're all headed now to primary school. But this particular point and area in the CBC curriculum is focusing on the foundation of the child. Here, the teacher and the parent is not supposed to focus so much on teaching and learning as we know it is. And what I talk about is learning how to read and write, mathematics, Kiswahili. No, they are introduced at this level. But at this level, it's really to just curate an experience for the child. First of all, to enjoy a lot of play, to cooperate and to socialize with others, to develop independent skills, and to develop basic literacy and numeracy skills. For example, how to identify sounds, how to count numbers 1 to 20. It's supposed to be very easy breezy at this level. And that's what usually happens at the pre-primary level. And then after that, the child goes to the 6, which is now the 6 in the 2633. At this level, we call it the 6 years of primary. And it's segmented into 1 to 3 and 3 and 4 to 6. So here, this is, let's say, lower primary, and this is upper primary. At lower primary, the child has just turned 6. Remember, they should have turned 6 because they have turned 4 by January 31st. So a lot of the children at this level are turning 6 years old. And at this point, again, there is a reintroduction of the basic numeracy and literacy skills that a child is supposed to have. And at this point, it's just building the foundation of learning, where now children are introduced to different concepts. These different concepts are like numeracy, as I said before, there's literacy, and there's usually an assumption. I don't want to say that it's in policy, but there's an assumption that there's a child who probably did not quite understand a lot of the concepts that were being learned here, and they will need to have them redone at this level. So at this level, again, it's a lot of foundation. It's a lot of building blocks for the learner. And so once a child has gone through the grade 1 to 3, then they also do, as I said earlier in the first episode, if you can remember, we talked about assessments. So a lot of the assessments here are projects. The child is doing a lot of work when it comes to, are you able to, curate with their own hands? Remember, these children are still young. And so a lot of the work here is portfolios, projects, and little assessments in the class, end of term assessment, midterm assessments. But a lot of the work here for you parents who are watching or for any educators should be very, very practical. And it should just be a way of understanding. Is a child able to understand what they have learned in class? And of course, at their level. And then from here, the child moves to what we call the upper primary, which is grade 4 to 6. Now here you will notice that when your child gets to this level or they're already there, you know that there are assessments that they'll be required to do. These assessments are called CBAs, class-based assessments. The teacher will be expected to give them assessments from the examiner, who is NEC. NEC is the Kenya National Examination Council. And there's so many things that are happening at this level, but it's really just to build up on the foundation that has been brought in from the grade 1 to 3. When the child is at grade 6, they do what we call the Kenya It's called the KPSEA. So the KPSEA, I'm sure most of you have heard it. This is what people are equating to the KCPE, but it's not the same. This assessment, let me call it an assessment, is actually just an end of a session or an end of a season assessment, and it's called a summative assessment. And it curates all the assessments that the child has been doing from grade 3 all the way to grade 6. And it's a sit-in assessment, and they're just gauged on to understand, did they really understand their knowledge? And it really tests on memory. And so that's why I was saying all the other assessments that you will notice on these other levels are usually very practical, because the government or the system wants to curate an experience that covers both the practical knowledge and also just the knowledge that you acquire from memorization. So once the child has gone through this, they go through what we call the junior school. So this junior school is this one, the third one. And junior school is 3 years of, we don't call it secondary and we don't call it primary. So it's more of a transition. And a fun fact, when this curriculum was designed, the junior secondary was supposed to actually be domiciled in what we call secondary schools today. It was actually called junior secondary. So during that period, students were supposed to now move from the primary schools and move into the secondary schools. But because the government went through what we call serikali mpya, and there was a lot of conversations by parents and educators, they said these children are too young. Let them stay in primary school. So these learners were pushed back into this particular system. And so that's why it's called now junior school and not junior secondary. So junior school is like a transition period. And here, the idea is to create a program where a child is able to understand themselves better and start thinking about what are the things that I like? What are my interests? What am I good at? What am I able to do and what am I not able to do? So it's sort of like a place where it's an open space for them to explore on different subjects or learning areas. And then from what we call career guidance, from career counseling, from help from both parents and teachers, this child is then able to transition from the junior school and move to what we call the senior secondary. Now, this is where we are at right now as we are shooting this video. We are actually at the grade 9, who are our first or actually the pioneer class of CBC. So at this level, the child is supposed to do so many subjects, and we'll talk about that in another episode. And these children now are doing all these subjects. They're trying to understand, am I good at math? Am I good at languages? Am I good at English? And all these things now are happening at that level before they move into what we call the senior secondary. So this senior secondary conversation, I want us to talk about it in another episode, but it's really where now the placement of the learner begins.